Welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast.
Can't even recognize this place. Too many pieces of our past mistakes.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I believe real change starts from the inside out. So let's work together to improve our money and our lives from the inside out. We will explore all things money and our relationship with it. Join me each week with a rotating set of co-hosts, friends, and interviews. Let's jump in.
It's time, we going round and round and round and round and round.
Teach them well and let them,
No, keep going.
show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense
peace of mind. I always make up,
make
I
it
don't know the words.
easier. Let the children's la 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 laughter. I'm scatting.
Hey, Erica.
Hey, Maggie.
I would like to welcome you to Inside Out Money.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about your new podcast.
Thanks. I mean, I'm not having you, to be clear. You're one of our new rotating co-hosts. So thank you for having me.
Well, you know what? I think we are committed to each other. We've been in each other's lives for a long time. So I think we're kind of stuck with each other. So it feels like a quid pro quo kind of situation. And I'm here for it.
Well, speaking of knowing each other for a long time, you actually, I didn't fully appreciate this till just now, but of all of the new rotating co-hosts, I don't know what we'll call that term, but that's what I'm using for now. I have known you the longest.
All right.
I was trying to go back to like an exact year. It's like 1993, 1994.
I think
because I was in 8th grade in 1993, but you were a year younger. So it would have been my 9th grade year that we met.
Yeah, 93, 94, not to date us. You know, we were in college during 93 and 94, right?
Or early high school, one of the two.
Or early high school or daycare. Let's go with daycare.
Yeah, but we go back. I mean, you're one of my oldest friends. We go back over 30 years. We have matching tattoos for anyone who, I mean, they're not exactly matching, but they're in the same with a group, not just the two of us, with a group of friends, but we go back a long, long time. But just for what it's worth, we didn't get those tattoos till we were 40. That was a 40th.
Right. We didn't get those when we were in daycare.
Yeah, or in high school. That was a 40th birthday assignment for all of us. I'm going to let you kind of tell us about yourself and like introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, well, thanks, Maggie. So my name is Erica. I grew up in Atlanta with Maggie, and I now live in Portland, Oregon. I'm married to my husband, whom I endearingly call the landlord.
And we'll get into why you call him the landlord, because it's actually
Yes.
related to some financial stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And we have two kids who I'll refer to as the girl one and the boy one.
I like it.
And we have a dog named Daryl. He's the only one who can be famous because he's basically a male model.
He's the only one who won't be fully anonymous. I like it.
Exactly, yes.
Does the landlord know that you call him the landlord?
He does. I don't think that
Does
he
he like
loves it. He doesn't like it. He doesn't love it. He's accepting it.
He's earned the title, though. So
He's earned the title. Yes,
or the badge, whatever you want to call it.
He's very handy around the house. A lot of our household financial decisions run through him first with like final say. So, for example, we were able to buy new appliances after an argument over milk going bad in the fridge, an entire gallon. And I said, I think we need a new fridge. And he said, I think it's because the kids leave the refrigerator door open too long. And I said, I don't think a whole gallon goes bad for just the kids standing there with it open for minutes.
So I love that the jug of milk, gallon? What do you call milk?
Gallon.
The gallon of milk led to a new fridge. But I like that like the landlord first tried to blame it on just the kids left the door open.
Well, he was trying to say the fridge is fine. It was the fridge that came with the house when we bought it.
He was standing up for the fridge.
He was standing up for our finances, I guess.
That's what landlords like to do. You know, that's their job.
They do. And he didn't want to spend the money. And then eventually he realized, okay, I think the fridge is on its last legs. And so I, rejoiced and shared with a friend, oh, the landlord landlord said we could get new appliances. And my friend said, I thought you owned your house. I said, I do. And so that's what, right. Yeah. No, I just live here.
You're like, I kind of do, but really.
Yeah. I really mostly say I just live here.
I mean, you're like half joking. Maybe only like 75% joking, actually.
74. We'll go 74.
Or for anyone who's like offended by this discussion, I will say Erica is a strong, powerful woman, and she can buy herself a fridge when she wants. But this is like the communication in relationships about finances. And there's times when you sometimes just have to treat your husband like the landlord to have some amicable financial discussions and kind of, again, I don't know. Some people may.
I understand what you're saying with that. Like the landlord does a lot around the house. He understands more about the external household things than I understand or care to understand. And so that's where it balances out. I focus on the inside of the house, the decorating, some of the more visual things. And then there are just certain things that I really don't have a say in, nor do I care to have a say in. I leave those to him. And those happen to be the general external household management things of like doing yard work and things like that I could do, but he maybe enjoys them a little more, maybe has a little more experience doing them.
I think it's sometimes like the hard goods versus the soft goods too.
Absolutely.
High level. Okay, well, let's get back to your introduction, though, because I'm excited for your new fridge, though. The best part of your introduction is, and I'm trying to think of like a nice way to say this, because I don't think it's going to come across as rude or mean in any way, but like, you're not a finance expert, right? But that's the best part of you being one of our co-hosts. And it's one of the ones I'm actually most excited about. This is like my kids. I'm going to tell everybody I'm most excited about. I love you the most. That I'm most excited about is you, like, I don't know, you verbalize, like, where are you in your financial journey? And why were you excited to do this with me? Aside from the fact that you just love me and we have matching tattoos and
well, there's that. There's all that. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm excited to do it because I know I have a lot of work to do. I think, you've been talking about finance in your financial journey for a while, and it was something I couldn't really relate to in the same way because I think I was always, well, I'll start here. I don't think it was taught to us when we were growing up in the same way that it's more of a focus now. And I will say, you've been really good about saying we should be talking about money. We can learn from each other. And it was one of those taboo subjects for so long. And it was one of the subjects that stayed within the family. So it was something my dad and my mom always tried to instill in me, but didn't make sense because I couldn't put it into practice beyond my own allowance, which was minimal, because I had. Did
you mean your allowance, like literally your allowance?
Right.
Oh, okay. For a minute, I thought you meant like you were using the word allowance, like your agency, kind of like beyond my.
No, like
literally.
I did a chore and received allowance.
Yes.
And it's like, what is this going to get me besides candy? Because it's trying to teach the value of a dollar. I just never. And I'll say I was in a privileged household. We were, we had everything we needed. And so I didn't have to worry about money. And that's probably because whatever worries came were on my parents' shoulders and they weren't communicated to me, which, you do shield children from. But then as I started working, I was at the bottom of the pay grade. Didn't learn to negotiate for myself only until my most recent job. Another thing that isn't communicated to people. So I was always trying to play catch up and then didn't understand how to work with what I had and not try to keep up with the Joneses, which I know is like a huge thing for people. So I'm only just now trying to really grapple with and address what I need to do to get myself to feeling the financial freedom that I want to have, that I see you have, that I want to be able to share with other people, of just feeling comfortable with spending money, not having guilt or shame around how or why I spend my money. And then understanding why I spent money the way I have in my past to do better in my future.
So on that note, it was Erica's idea, this particular topic, because with all of the co-hosts that we have coming on, one of my first questions, everybody, was, what's a topic you're really excited to start with, right? Because I could throw a bunch of topics at you. I've got all sorts of financial stuff on my mind. And when you said this, it was the first one you said, and I loved it. I was like, I love it. It's what you and I have talked about. We haven't necessarily worded it that way a lot, but in line with everything you just said in your introduction, technically what you need to do, but you often are hung up on the psychological and mindset and emotional aspect of it. And that is how many people are, right? That's how most people are, right? Everybody. And I think that is one of the biggest things that most people get hung up on. And so, it's the spirit of why this podcast is named Inside Out Money, because I believe, and not just my belief, research supports that most of our financial decisions are heavily psychological and mindset based. So there's a quote from a book that I just read that I loved. It's called The Psychology of Money. I'm probably late reading it. I think it came out a while ago, but we'll put it in the show notes. But one of the things it said was financial success is not a hard science. It's a soft skill where how you behave is more important than what you know. And I loved that quote because to me, I kind of summed it up as like, it's not about the math, it's about the mind.
And that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's not about the math, it's about the mind. And that's where the landlord is a mental math champion, has a physical trophy to show for it. I am not a math person. Like it panics me. If you send a spreadsheet to me, my eyes will go cross and I'll pass out. But it really is like, it's not about figuring out the numbers. It's about figuring out what's going in my mind that's making me pulled towards wanting to just open up my wallet and let me just backtrack. Like, I am not in debt around my spending. I am just trying to align with how I spend with my values of like, which are your values: minimalism, not owning too much, not buying things that are single use that will end up in a landfill. So it all comes back to trying to align my spending with my values and save so that I can splurge.
Yeah.
So that it actually feels like a valuable purchase to me instead of like, ooh, did I really need that? Well, now I have it.
So let's start with why this topic matters. And I think we kind of just talked about it, but we'll double click on it for a minute. You just said why it matters to you. And I think the reality is that this is where most people struggle and need help, right? They can figure out the math. The math is not that difficult. Some people enjoy it more than others. Like you said, the landlord enjoys it more and you glaze over when you see a spreadsheet, but it is something where most people need help. Like we've all heard the stats about how many people are in debt around the world. There's like a very famous quote around too many people spend money they haven't earned to buy things they don't want to impress people they don't like, right? That's a quote that's thrown around a lot. There's a stat by the American Psychological Association that 81% of Americans reported feeling stressed about money at least once in the past month. And the average American is exposed to around 4,000 to 10,000 ads per day, which is crazy. So as much as we want and are trying to do better, there's constantly forces being thrown at us trying to get us off track, which we'll get into because it's related to why we spend the way we spend.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you said that how many ads are thrown our way. We live in a capitalistic society, and going back to why I spend the way I do, you asked me, kind of think back into how I was conditioned. And my family, I come from a bunch of women who love to shop. And that was kind of our family outing. And it was a fun thing. We would always try to find a good deal. And so it was based around like, almost like you felt like you were winning or gaming the system by finding a good deal on something realistically we probably didn't need.
Yeah.
In thinking about this, based on the fact that you said how many ads there are thrown our way at a time, we will never win.
Yeah, you weren't gaming the system. The system gamed you.
They will always be one up on us. And that's where I have to have the mindset of like, no, I'm not winning by getting this deal. I'm being sucked into something I don't need.
Yeah. You got to like opt out of the game in a way, right? I always we'll talk about this more, but like just not walking into stores, there's all these things you can do to make it easier, but we all fall victim to this stuff, right? I'm fairly disciplined with my money, but if I walk into Target, it's super tempting. I often walk out with crap I didn't intend to buy. And if I walk into TJ Maxx, which makes me think of it when you talk about like shopping with your sisters and your family when you were a kid, I'm going to walk out with something that I really didn't need because it's like a good deal. And all of a sudden I'm like, I get a dopamine hit and all these things. So,
and I think we talked about this, like for spending, it's filling a hole of something. What are we trying to fill the hole? How do I dive deeper into that? So I think that's where like the psychological comes in.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know why I spend the way I do, but I know that it's because it's filling something that I haven't yet identified. And what I need to do is identify that thing instead of spending and treating it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, let me treat you to a new sweater.
I believe the answer to the question why we spend the way we spend, the answer is nuanced, right? It's not one thing. It's a bunch of different factors, right? And I'm going to read a quick quote from this book, The Psychology of Money. People do some crazy things with money, but no one is crazy. People from different generations, raised by different parents who are earned different incomes and held different values in different parts of the world, born into different economies, experiencing different job markets with different incentives and different degrees of luck, learn very different lessons. Everyone has their own unique experience with how the world works, and what you've learned is more compelling than what you can learn about secondhand. So all of us go through life anchored with a set of views about how money works that vary wildly from person to person. That to me is kind of the answer. It's an answer that's not an answer, right? It explains how nuanced this is. And we'll jump into some of the specific psychological factors that influence how we spend money. But it's a bunch of factors. It's not one thing. That's my belief, at least.
You're right. And I think what that quote does is it opens the door for each of us to look at how it is an individual factor. You know, in the quote, it says you can't learn it secondhand. You can learn it by putting it into action for yourself or not. You know, there's an action either way, whether it's saving or spending. And so it's a matter of how you learn from yourself, how you learn about how and why you spend or don't, and move on from that.
Totally. So let's go through what we've identified as the main psychological factors that influence how we spend money. And I'm going to kick it off with a quote from a Charles Schwab 2021 Modern Wealth Survey research that they put out. They said the top 3 reasons people overspend are 1, impulse purchases, 2, lack of self-control, and 3, trying to keep up with the others. I thought that was just an interesting piece of research to support these various factors. But ultimately, I think it breaks down to a couple of elements. One is just our emotions. So it's a little bit of what you talked about earlier, Erica, around impulse buying, retail therapy, as people say, of like, you've had a stressful day and you want some convenience thing that's going to make you happy in the short term. And it just feels good. You get a dopamine hit. There's a bunch of kind of pieces around that emotional aspect of it.
Right. There's some instant gratification there to it, which often leads to, again, I don't want to say the shame and regret and hang too much on those 2 words, but it's an instant gratification that then ends up with like, this isn't really how I should have spent my money, invested in the economy.
Another big factor is social norms and pressures. So you mentioned it earlier, Erica, keeping up with the Joneses, but just the constant pressure we have from other people that, you know, well, other people have a really nice car in their driveway in the neighborhood that I live in. Like, should I have that? When I pull into the parking deck at work, I'm driving an old beat up car and everybody else has a, you know, brand new luxury car. And when my friends are getting their bonuses, they're putting in swimming pools at their house. And I'm giving big expensive examples. It could be much smaller ones of like, this is kids, right? I actually, by the way, do you know this, Erica? I thought you were like really rich when we were kids.
Really?
I don't know if rich is the right word, but I definitely thought you had a lot more money than we did.
Huh.
Yeah. Your house was like, you had a cool house and you lived in like a different neighborhood. And I thought you and a few other people in our crew just like had like a noticeable more amount of money. Like you did like fancier vacations and like didn't you go abroad when we were kids?
No, that's interesting because like my parents didn't travel internationally. They had never been to Europe until they were like in their 60s.
Oh, wow. There's something about like the neighborhood you lived in and like your house. And like, I always thought having a Volvo was really cool. You had a Volvo in high school.
But I thought everybody had a Volvo. I thought that was our starter car.
That's pretty popular in the 90s.
I think that was like, you know, your neighborhood versus mine. Like we all had the Volvos, you all had the Hondas. I felt like that's really interesting. And no, to your point, I'll go back to your point about, you know, you're giving the big answers of like seeing people drive nicer cars. And one of the smaller examples of trying to keep up is, you know, say you are wearing an outfit or some piece of clothing that someone compliments you on, and it's someone whose style you really admire. And it's like, oh, now I have this weird need to want to impress them and always have something that they might want to compliment compliment because for whatever reason, it makes me feel better.
Yeah.
And then so you start kind of dressing differently. And I will say when I moved after going to college, I moved to Washington, D.C., where, clearly that matters to people. It's kind of just the whole biz of being in D.C. And then after D.C., I moved to Portland, Oregon, where it's just not the scene. And that's more of my speed of you wear what you feel comfortable in. People impress you by who they are, not what they wear, not what they drive.
Yeah. It's a much more casual city. It's one of many things I love about Portland. But there are fewer social norms and pressures, I believe, in Portland than perhaps in DC or New York or certain cities. But they're not non-existent, right? You still have this concept of keeping up with the Joneses and what someone else's house looks like. And it is hard, right? It is really hard to not care what other people think, right? And it requires practice, soul searching, figuring out other things you care about more, which is like freedom of your time and, having, it feels really good to have a big bank account and be able to deal with emergencies and be able to just buy a new fridge when you need one without thinking twice about it. And the landlord wouldn't think twice about it either. I often think like I would rather be rich than look rich, but I didn't think that way 20 years ago. And I didn't really even think that way maybe 30 years ago.
Yeah. And you've said that, and that's really stuck with me, especially going back to cars. I have a 25-year-old Lexus, which at the time when I bought it was maybe 10 years old, but it was in great shape. And I was like, wow, look at me. And this was while I lived in DC. I'm driving a Lexus.
Yeah.
Now this thing is beat to hell, but she still drives well. And we don't have a car payment. And now that it's 25 years old, we're trying to see how long we can make it go just for the fun of it. Because eventually we'll buy an EV, which is a pressure in Portland, where it's a very green city and it's a good pressure to have.
That's a big keeping up with the Joneses.
It
in
is,
Portland,
but the landlord and I both work in the renewable industry. And so for us, it's also like, well, we need to actually align with that. But
I would argue that's good social pressure, but
that's good social pressure. We're also not going to take on a car payment while we have two working cars, albeit gasoline cars. But we drive very infrequently. So,
well, and I like it. It's like almost your Lexus has become like a badge of honor.
Exactly.
And I believe the more things where you go through that experience and say, we could choose to buy a new car now, but we're purposely getting as much life as we can out of this with no car payment and everything else, then you realize how many other things you can do that with and that it doesn't affect your happiness long term. But you have to build and grow that mindset. Back to the point earlier about just from the quote from that book of like, you have to have that own experience and feel that way to then realize that you can do that in 10 other scenarios in your life and feel the same way.
And that's interesting that you touched on the term long term, because I think a lot of us think the immediate future or the immediate right now. And a lot of people do live paycheck to paycheck. So it's hard to think about the long term. You might put aside money in your 401k or having a savings account, which is great. Not everyone can do that. It really is like there are so many inequities that make it hard for people to even have that luxury of putting aside money for the future. But once you get to the point, where you can start doing that, and even just with everyday spending, I have to get myself thinking about what do I want to spend freely on that will not stress me out, that will be more meaningful. So I've been trying to focus more on experiences, family vacations, things that benefit the long term, that will be lasting memories, not lasting garbage for the planet.
Yeah. More stuff.
So
another category is cognitive biases. And I'm going to give one example of this because there's a bunch of different ones. Is the idea that when stores put things on sale, it's tricking you into thinking that you're getting a really good deal. And so you all of a sudden want something that you didn't want previously. That is an example of a cognitive bias.
Yeah, to your point about, something seeming like it's a good deal because it's on sale. Well, if you don't need it, it's not a good deal.
Yeah, you just spent money you didn't need to spend on something you didn't really need, but that some marketing campaign or offer convinced you that you needed.
Right. You thought, again, like I often thought that you were gaming the system, but you don't game, you lose. We're always losing.
We're all losers.
We're all losers. That's our takeaway. Yeah.
Okay. We're out. See you later. We're all losers. No, I often think about outlet malls. At some point, maybe 20, 15 years ago, I learned that a lot of stores actually make a separate line of lower end clothes for their outlet malls. So J. Crew, Banana Republic, etc. They actually produce different quality items for their outlet stores. sometimes things from the main store actually do make it to the outlet, but even Nike does this. There's certain shoes that like they never went into a regular retail store. They went straight to the outlets, and they're designing it for that because they know there are certain people that's where they're going to do their shopping. They're going to go to an outlet mall because they mentally think they're getting a better deal, and they're going to buy more as a result because they think it's on sale. And that is a cognitive bias that is marketing led and based, and it's a pricing strategy and a bunch of other things. But that is corporate America taking different tactics to sell to you. So that's a huge factor of like for you to get better about spending money and just understanding why you spend the way we spend. A huge factor is all the different marketing that's happening to us, which we'll come back to in a moment. But another big thing is just self-control and willpower, right? It is hard to practice self-control. It takes a lot of discipline. And that is why when we talk about just these psychological factors, that is one of the biggest things that makes it hard for us to stop spending money.
That's my biggest thing. And I've tried the tactics, don't take your wallet shopping with you. If you want it, you'll go back for it. If you're online shopping, put something in a cart and let it sit there. It's that instant gratification that goes in, or like, I have the money to spend, so I'm going to spend it. But and that's where it's so hard, because then it goes back into like, but why am I buying this thing? Do I need this thing? What is a need versus a want? There's so many questions that I'm using you as my personal therapist, my financial therapist to solve these for me. And I know that for me, it fills some sort of hole. There's always, with so many things in life, there's something that's the root cause or the core issue of what we're trying to figure out. And we have to figure those things out for ourselves. Again, that's where it comes back to the individual journey. There's no one size fits all for how we spend or save our money.
Yeah. And how we change the way we spend and save our money, right? How we get better. There is no one size fits all. And I believe, like, I know you've said a couple times, Erica, the like root cause. I don't believe it's one thing. I know I said this earlier, but I think for some people perhaps, but for the majority of people, I think it is 20 factors getting thrown at you at once. And you kind of got to like inch by inch start to break those down and understand them. And it's not a magic bullet. Like, I don't believe that one day you'll sit in a therapy session and realize like, oh, it's, the way my dad treated me, and that's why I can't stop spending money. Like,
right.
Yes. And I'm making up that example. My dad was very nice, by the way. And your dad is also very nice. He's a lovely man, known him for a long time. But I don't believe there's like one thing for most people. I think, and the reason I say that is important for people, I think, to wrap their heads around is if you believe that, you're looking for one thing versus realizing there's 20 things. And you're going to actually have to tackle them all separately in some way. And one of the big things is our upbringing and our cultural background. It does shape our attitudes and behaviors around money. So you talked about that a little bit, Erica. But like our parents' attitude towards money, the socioeconomic status we grew up in, the cultural values we were or weren't taught about money. Like in my household, we didn't talk. It's not like financial literacy was discussed as a topic the way it is in my current household. As you can imagine, we talk pretty openly with our kids about money. It's more that both of my parents, for various necessity and their own upbringing reasons, were pretty frugal people in many ways and didn't have a lot of extra stuff to give us. And so instilled a lot of like, we had to work for our own stuff. And like that definitely created a lot of my discipline around money at a young age. So I can recognize some of that, but I do think it's interesting in the Psychology of Money book reinforced how much our upbringings and our own kind of money story impacts our adult behaviors and attitudes about money.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because we both have kids. And so we can see how we were brought up and what was discussed with us and how we want to instill differently in our kids as they're growing up. So I know like a lot of people, and we're going to start this with our kids soon. They're like just at too young of an age to really grasp this. We're teaching them about savings. Of course, the landlord's on top of this. He's the frugal one.
That's his department.
Yeah, that's his department. But I will try to say, no, you need to save your money. Don't buy this random thing. And then I'll go buy a random thing myself. So, I need to lead by example. And maybe it's through teaching my kids and doing it with them. It's the same time I say you need to eat fruits and vegetables. And I'm like, well, I should probably have a carrot myself. But so with my kids, a lot of times I'll talk to other parents, and what they do is they say, here's your allowance, or here's something you've earned. Maybe it's like a birthday gift of money or something. You can put this much aside for savings. You have this much to spend, and you have this much to put towards a charity or organization of your choice, which I really like because it's thinking about other people. It kind of shows that money has power in ways beyond just spending for stuff.
Giving back.
It's
teaching them to give, it's teaching them to like build up that giving back muscle and recognizing their privilege and that we actually have a lot and there's a lot we can do to give back to others.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's a huge part of it too. You know, like a lot of what the landlord and I do with our money that we both are in alignment on is donating to different causes and organizations because we don't have the time right now being working parents. We don't have the time to go volunteer the ways we'd like. And again, that is a privileged thing to be able to put money towards these organizations. But that goes in line with our habits, you know, our spending habits of like, well, I'd rather get in the habit of donating, knowing that the money is going to somewhere of our choosing versus it's going to, like you said, corporations who are trying to game us. We're all losers, but we're winners when we can spend it in ways where we feel the value coming out of it. Even if it's just that feel good emotion, it doesn't have the guilt and shame that comes from walking out of Target with, oh God, what did I just spend? Here is a real life example of one time I went into Target when I was trying to be really mindful. I went in specifically to buy a new face wash and I was like, well, here's one that's on sale, but I really want the one that's not on sale. And I sat there hemming and hawing for about 5 minutes and I bought the cheaper face wash. And then this was like 10 years ago to date myself with a DVD player. And then I walked by the $5 DVD bin and I see the movie Major League sitting on top. And I was like, oh yeah, I have to have this. So I negotiated with myself over the face wash I wanted just to impulse buy Major League, which I've seen a million times.
And that if only you could have predicted that 10 years later, it would just be available for streaming on 50 services for free.
I know.
All those wasted DVDs. I know not the point of your story. Also not the point of your story, but Erica's a huge baseball fan.
I am a huge baseball fan.
She knows a lot more about sports than me, but that's not saying much because I know very little about sports. But she knows a lot about sports. I always joke when we'll be like texting and she'll be texting about like, don't ruin some game. I'm watching it on like a group thread. And I'm like, don't worry. Didn't even know there was a game. Didn't even know the World Series was on right now.
Please know that those on group threads, those requests are not directed at you.
I assume that. Okay. The other big one, which we've talked about a little bit, but it's worth double clicking on is marketing and advertising's influence on our spending habits. Like we were just talking about that is going into Target is marketing and advertising. Like they put certain impulse things on the end cap. Some person, it's like their job at Target to decide that they want to put that pile of $5 DVDs out there to catch you and make up for the loss they took on the face wash experience from you. I'm half joking, but it's true. All the things like I worked in Home Depot as my first job out of college. There's a massive department that's called merchandising. All they focus on is how to sell more of their individual products. It's why they put the bread and milk in the back of the store. Did you know this, Erica?
No, and this is so interesting because again, it comes back to having them get into our brains.
So I think to me is fascinating because the more you learn about this, the more I always joke like paranoia, but like you need a healthy dose of paranoia to get better at your finances. Yes, the reason that they put the milk and eggs and bread in the back of the grocery store is because those are the staples that most people need. You have to walk through the entire store to get to them. And on your way there, you're going to buy a bunch of other crap. If they were trying to make it as easy for you to get in and out of that store, they would put the most purchased items in the front of the store, but they put them at the back of the store so that you have to buy more stuff. And that's what the end caps are at Target. That's what they put a lot of thought into. That's why they're constantly changing out the product. So anyways, these companies have massive marketing departments, budgets. They have PhDs literally on staff trying to figure out how to use data to better sell to you. They're hiring social media influencers. They're offering different discounts and promotions. Many companies now are like offering them year round because it's kind of how we've become used to. They know people respond to a discount. So it's almost like they never charge the regular price. It's constantly on discount. And they create a sense of urgency with you. They're using emotional appeals. There's all sorts of very strategic methods that they are using. And so I often, when my kids who are super susceptible to this stuff, because they've not yet built that muscle, I say of paranoia, but it's of realizing that you're being marketed to and wanting to win the game, right? Which we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to the awareness. Like now I know when I go into Target, like where I used to think, oh, they're putting out the spring stuff because they're such kind people at the store. And they want me to be aware of the bubbles and the sidewalk chalk. But now and be like, not today, Target, keep on moving.
Yeah. That's how I feel about Target is I'm like, you're trying to get me to buy more stuff when I walk in, and I'm going to win this game. I'm going to either do 2-day shipping, which you offer me for free, so thank you, or I'm going to do store pickup, or I'm going to go in without my kids, which I frequently am like, I can barely get in and out of Target on my own without buying crap I don't need. I definitely can't get in and out without my kids. And even if I do, I'm having to then disappoint them, and they're having to go through a whole emotional thing but they know that when we walk into stores, they're not always going to get something, right? And they're used to, I can be like, go look at the toys, or you can go like, look at this candy. Now that they get allowance, I'm like, you can spend your own money on that. And then they think very differently about it.
Right.
They still do it sometimes, but they just think differently about it. But I think just going into situations like walking into a Target, which we can all relate to, with your mind on kind of hyper aware of what's about to happen helps, because you go in eyes wide open versus going in tired and stressed at the end of a week after work. And you're just like, you just want to buy stuff because it feels good and it makes you happy to buy that Major League DVD.
Yeah. And you said something about your kids having an emotional reaction when they're not getting things. And we have our own adult versions of this, that like panic of like, well, if I don't get this, someone else will get it. It'll be gone. And I'm trying to switch my mindset of, well, if it's gone, then I wasn't supposed to have it. And to your point too about marketing, I mean, think about how many emails we get in our inbox daily. So soon, like sign up for this and we'll give you a 10% discount or whatever. As soon as I sign up to get the discount, I immediately unsubscribe. I don't want to see it. If it's there, I'm going to be intrigued. And so it's out of sight, out of mind. And it's also having the awareness, like understanding these marketing structures is really helpful. So it's having the awareness of everything that's coming at me and just kind of being able to make the mental block of, no, I'm not falling for this.
Yes. And I often think to myself, I spent 20 years working in marketing. I know the tactics. I've got an insider view, and I still fall victim to these things all the time, right? So it really takes like an ongoing sense of diligence and awareness. And on that note, Erica, I think we should shift to what we think would be helpful for people. I think it's helpful to shift towards some thoughts and advice for how we take some of the learnings we just talked about of why we spend the way we spend into improving some of our habits. And look, this is what this podcast is going to talk about all the time. So there's going to be tons of more episodes on this, but just to give a few thoughts, I think we always want to try to leave you with something actionable when we have these discussions. And so these are just some of our thoughts on how you can take what we've just talked about to try to improve the way you spend and feel happier about it and not frustrated by it.
Yeah, this is great. I like to have, since you're my financial therapist, it's kind of like any sort of therapy session. You want your tools to take out into the real world to put into practice. And so I think, at least for me, since I'm the work in progress, understanding Target is not my best friend. They are out to get me deep down. I will still give them my money. But just when you walk into a store, being mindful of what's advertised towards you, understanding that things are discounted, but maybe not the best deal. I think, and kind of backtracking a little bit, I had a conversation with some friends. We were at an art gallery once when we were traveling, and we saw this beautiful art, and he was like, wow, this is something we might want to buy. But like, art doesn't have a price tag. It's what it means to you and what it means to the artist and the amount that they put in. And so that was a conversation I had with the people of like, if it's valuable to you, you'll be more willing to spend. You can identify and price tag that value. This might really invoke an emotion in you. I don't think like something random on the end cap at Target really does that in the same way. So I've been going back to the face wash. I really wanted this specific face wash. Don't worry about the price of it. And then use that going forward of like, but this I do not need. Get out of here, Major League. I've seen you a million times.
Well, your skin looks great, Erica. I just want to throw that in.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. As does yours. But just going back to what is this worth to you? Don't look at the price tag, but what is this worth? Are you going to be happy that you have this in a week or a month?
And Erica, I think one of the points you're making that I'm a big fan of is I don't expect people to save money on all categories, right? Focus on the things that you really care about. Good, high quality face wash. I don't know why saying facial wash is like a tongue twister.
Right.
And then don't worry about some of the things that you don't care about as much, right? Because it's hard to care about everything, right? And so this is another quote from the book that I liked. Savings can be created by spending less. You can spend less if you desire less, and you will desire less if you care less about what other people think of you. As I argue often, money relies more on psychology than finance. And so I'm like repeating points we've already made, but I love some of these quotes. And I think one of the biggest things that is helpful as a first step for people, you almost went to the second step, Erica, of like kind of think about what you really care about. But the first step is like, take some time for self-reflection. Like take a moment to really digest and think about, why do you spend the way you spend, right? We went through a bunch of potential reasons, but everyone is super different and comes from a different background and has a bunch of different forces in their lives that started when you were young and continued throughout your life. And think about what your emotional triggers might be. Think about where you want to improve. Think about what, maybe you're happy with the way you spend, and so there's not much to think about. But maybe, like Erica, you've expressed you're frustrated sometimes with the way you spend and you don't know why you're spending that way and you want to do better, but you're not always doing, like, you know, you should be doing better, but you don't always execute it that way, right? Then you walk into the Target and I know we keep harping on like a 10-year-old. I don't know if DVDs are even more than 10 years old, but anyway.
It might have actually been 15 years, just to like maybe look better in the DVD front. Yeah, let's just say it was in the 90s.
Just that idea of, take some time for self-reflection, because I think it will be different for everyone. And in that self-reflection, think about the stuff that you want to prioritize versus the things that you just don't really care about. And those are so different for everyone.
Yeah, I think the question that I'm hearing that I'm going to ask myself, and maybe listeners can ask too, is what does money represent to you? Is it your future? Is it you saving for your future, for your retirement, for an inheritance for your family? Is it your freedom to travel, to eat well, to spend money on the things you want to spend money on? Maybe it's somewhere in between. And that's what I'm trying to find. I don't want to be the person who saves all my money to live life in 30 years when I retire.
That's a great point. I think there's also a slew of very practical tips for people who want to better understand why they spend the way they do. And we've talked about some of these, but some other ones are, create a budget, track your expenses, avoid going into certain stores as often, like we talked about with Target, right? Set some financial goals. Think about what some of your goals are, like Erica was just saying. And those are some of the practical things. Like when you start tracking your expenses, you're going to become way more aware of some of this stuff. But Erica, one of my favorites, which is common advice for many things, is surround yourself with people who are doing, more of what you want and less of what you don't want, right? So surround yourself with the people who will encourage the behavior that you're trying to strive for, which is what I love about this podcast.
Yeah.
I think my vision of this podcast, and one of the things that I loved from Friends on Fire, was it's a way to be around other people and talk about money in a casual and non-judgmental, I don't know a better word other than casual, right? Like a casual way that isn't, we'll get into some more technical topics, but I want this to be like Erica and I and our other co-hosts are like your new friends, and we're talking about money, and we're all trying to get better in different ways, and we all struggle with similar things and different things. But surrounding yourself with people like us who are willing to have these conversations and reading different books, listening to this podcast, other podcasts. There's a new Netflix show called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Have you watched it yet?
I heard the intro the other day.
Yeah, it's actually really
good. The landlord
good.
Was watching a second of it, and I was thinking, oh, are we going to watch this together? Is this my his come to Jesus talk with me about finances? Is us watching this show?
Yeah, it's his intervention. It's actually not a bad show. It's also known as it's a good show. I'm only 2 episodes in. I'm quoted that when I say it's not a bad show, it always makes me think of my old boss, who is awesome. But sometimes we would joke that his compliment was like a backwards compliment. He's like, "That's not a bad idea." I'm like, "Do you mean that might be a good idea?" Or he'd be like, "I don't hate it." And they're like, "But do you love it?" Not really, but I don't hate it. But so I don't. It's a good show. It's like a lot of shows where they're looking for kind of these extreme examples of people who need to get better with their fun. They need a good story, right? It's not just the average Joe, right? It's kind of, there's some fun angles on all of the different story. Fun's the wrong word, but just, angles on people's different scenarios. But I like it. And I just think it's the sort of content. My point is surround yourself with the influences that will help you on your financial journey, and do it in a fun way. It doesn't have to be overly dry and technical. And I hope this show will never come across as boring. I hope this is a fun part of your day.
Yeah, no, I think at least for me, I think that the thing that has scared me off, well, you're talking about keeping a budget. Well, the landlord does that and he tracks it in a spreadsheet. How dare you try to suggest I do something with a spreadsheet? If I could track my budget in a Word document with track changes, great. But I don't want to.
You could, but it wouldn't work as well. But in theory, you could.
Then there's still math, and I don't want to do that. I don't do math. But I think the thing that probably has definitely scared me, and I imagine other people, is that for so long this has felt like a taboo subject in a very cut and dry. You have money or you don't. And then you feel guilt or shame around, again, it comes back to those words of guilt and shame, the psychology of it, of whether you have it or not. And there is sort of, whether it's intended to be or not, a judgment around finances. And I think that's where people need to cut through. There is no judgment here. Like we've said so many times throughout this podcast, this is an individual thing. We need to talk about it. We need to support each other in non-judgmental ways to help each other think about what is the best way to make our money work for us so that we can be the winners in this situation.
Yeah.
And be in control of how we live our lives, and taking out the parts of it that make it feel like your parents are reprimanding you for spending your money on something you shouldn't have. You know, like we're adults. We shouldn't feel like we're small children being yelled at in any sort of way.
Yeah. We shouldn't feel like we have a landlord at home, you know?
Right. I mean, he is really handy around the house.
I thought you were going to say he's really handsome too. He's handsome and handy.
He is. He's a handsome handyman. He's my handsome handyman.
For those, I mean, the landlord's getting a bad rap here. He's a nice guy, guys. I mean,
he's the best. He's the number one landlord in my heart.
He likes his spreadsheets though.
He does like his spreadsheets.
He also makes he's a good cook. He makes a mean, remember those, like, I don't even know what he called them. They were like fried tacos kind of.
Oh, his tacos. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really good.
Landlord tacos.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah, we should call them landlord tacos.
I think like what we're trying to make this show be like is to just feel like a safe space for people to kind of dive into why they spend the way they do without the judgment around it. So I think another thing we can use as a takeaway is identifying emotional triggers around spending. You know, noticing whether you had a bad day, you're looking for instant gratification, and kind of sitting and spending time with that emotion, and instead of spending time on that emotion, treating it to something it may not need, that may not actually satisfy what you're feeling in the moment.
I like how you just said spending time with the emotion, not on the emotion.
Yeah.
That was deep. That was like hidden.
That was for you.
Deep. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I am really excited I've enjoyed this discussion, Erica, and I'm really excited for the various discussions to come, because I just think creating this space to talk about money and to talk about what's working for us, what's not working for us, and like we're all on our own journeys, is really important and is super helpful as we are all dealing with our finances. And it's a like overused phrase, but it's so true. It's personal finance, right? It is personal. It's different for everybody. And we're sharing our thoughts. We hope they're helpful. Yours are going to be slightly different. Everybody's are going to be slightly different. But I think having these discussions and listening to other people's point of view, we can learn from each other. And I'm just excited to have more of these discussions with you.
I'm excited too, Maggie. Thanks for having me as one of your rotating hosts.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for being here. I'm going to make all the rotating co-hosts get matching tattoos. That'll be one of our first year requirements. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. We're debating over who gets to read the closing. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for
listening.
Okay, I know your time is limited and valuable, and you'd rather be shopping at Target right now, but we appreciate you spending some of it with us. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please give us a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We would truly appreciate it.
We also really encourage you to share this episode with a friend or family member to encourage the ongoing discussions about money. Like we said, this is supposed to be a safe place to make everyone feel empowered to engage in their own personal journey with money and spending. And so you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. And if you have any thoughts or questions, we always love to hear from you. And you can leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370 or hit us up on Instagram. If you have any specific feedback for the landlord, please also send that in and we can get that to him directly.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm excited we're doing this, Erica.
Me too, Maggie. I miss your face already.
Aw. Well, at least we get to see each other's faces more often now.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Erica. Bye.
Thanks, Maggie. Bye.
Round, 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 round.